I apologize for the delay. We are trying to get this all set up. I'd like to do a roll call of assembly members at least. So, yeah, let's do that. And do they have a way to actually vocalize that they're online, right?
So they should either be calling in or using Teams, and if they're using Teams, they're probably using their phone or their laptop anyway, so we should be able to hear people.
Okay, let's see if we can do this. All right?
Okay.
And for my colleagues, if you want to ask a question, again, just shoot me a text. So please call the roll. Oh, yeah, okay, sorry.
Mr. Constant. I believe he said he's going to be a little late.
Oh, right, okay.
Mr. Dyson.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here, did that come through?
Yeah,
yes,
no, we just heard you.
Hear you. All right.
Right, thanks.
Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Perez-Garcia.
Okay.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
I can see him on the screen.
Right. Felix did send us a message, so maybe we're having a microphone issue with Felix.
Okay.
Ms. Zalatel.
Here.
Okay. And then Mr. Weddleton. And Mr. Dunbar.
Here. Okay. Well, we have most folks. Is there a way to turn the volume up on that, or is that as high as it goes?
It is maxed out.
Okay. All right. So for members of the school district, if you could please begin your presentation.
All right. Thank you very much. This is Dina Bishop, superintendent, and online with me, actually in their own offices. We all are all using the meeting connection site. Are Jim Anderson and Andy Radcliffe. So the three voices, our three voices are whom you would hear. The agenda, we have quite a few things to share with you, so we're just going to go right through them, but you can always reference back to this area as you were, this was sent to you. First slide is Jim. Slide, please.
Okay, if you look at this slide, what it represents is what would the structural deficit be under the worst possible assumptions, and that's flat funding, no increase in state funding. Our average inflation is about $10 to $12 million per year, which is approximately 2% across the board. Unlike the last year and this year, there's currently, for this, doesn't assume we would get outside the formula funding. And you can see that next year, that's what kind of led to what was approximately a $20 million deficit. And if the worst case assumptions were to continue out, naturally, the deficit would also continue out. Slide.
And if you could please identify yourself whenever you speak.
Oh, sorry, that was Jim Anderson, the Chief Finance Officer.
Okay. Please continue. Is there somebody speaking on?
Yes, sorry. This is Dina Bishop, and I just wanted to share that the areas examined in the budget, we looked at schools and programs, district-wide operations, and school activities, and there's a myriad of different opportunities to look at reductions. These were looked at extensively over the 4-month period in the budget using such things as surveys, group teams. We had about 200 teams of schools, teachers come up with, looking at efficiencies, ways that we could reduce and meet our bottom line. Next slide, please. This slide just demonstrates just the different cost factors. So if you wanted to have an idea of the deficit being almost 20 million, Individual whole units of things could cost, look at the one right above it, maintenance. We could totally eliminate the whole maintenance program and every person in it and just save ourselves for 1 year. But again, that's a function that we can't do without. Next slide, please. The manner in which we put the budget together, we have to look at the board goals and policy, community values and vision, and that came from our surveys and our in-person meetings with people. Employee input was taken a look at, student input, and then of course student needs. We have an outcome to make with student learning, and where inputs were placed were based on what students need in a school district. Next slide. I shared this when we met, that the preliminary budget then was put together. It needed to have these parameters. These were the guardrails. Address the deficit, focus on student needs and outcome, preserve opportunities for advanced learners, preserve health curriculum at the elementary level, avoid large-scale reduction in force, meet contractual requirements, of course, and provide that collaboration time that is in those negotiated contracts. Next slide.
Hi, this is Andy of the Office of Management and Budget. Going over to general fund revenue really quick. It's kind of the salient points on here is property taxes are expected. We're requesting an additional 1.8 million for the general fund. About 1.6 million of that is due to the required local contribution going up that is tied to the property values in Anchorage. So as they go up, the state contribution goes down and Anchorage must put in more. We're also using more fund balance, about 3.3 million more than we used last or anticipate using for the current year. In state revenue, about 7.9 million in foundation funding. That's entirely tied to increases in intensive needs students. So you'll see our services for those students going up as well. And then the one-time funding that was within House 78 is going away. That's the 8.4 million. And then the only other big one on this side is about 1.5 million reduction in federal impact aid, which is just tied to the number of students living on J. Barrett.
Next slide. As you look at the district input slide, you'll see that there are quite a few things that we have in our budget to make improvements across the district, whether it's curriculum, security, telemedicine to cover shortfalls in nurses, and pre-K, which is a continually growing requirement for the district. We will continue to make progress in those areas next year. If you look at the bottom, you'll see that the board has determined to use $8.3 million of our fund balance, that's about 1.5%, to retain the PTR at elementary. There's a 0.25 PTR increase at middle and high school, and to retain the Ignite program for the next year. Next slide. If you look at the expenditures by state function, you'll see that all of those in brown, by and large, 95+% of them are all in the schools or allow a school to function. Operations and maintenance and plant also includes all of our utilities and energy costs as well. So you'll see that if you add all of the brown bars up, about 97.42% of our revenue goes towards the schools. Down on the bottom, you'll see how we broke out categories of our expenditures. And when we look at budgets, whether we're going to get an increase or a decrease, we still have about 87+% of our revenue goes towards salaries and benefits of our personnel. We're about 99.4% members belonging to a collective bargaining agreement, so there are some annual increases there. And like the city sees continuing increases in other areas as well. Next slide. If you look at the staffing level reductions, and these are over the past 8 years, I laid this out by percentage of the FTE or full-time equivalents we had in FY13 and what we have in the budget in front of you for FY21. You'll see that support services instruction, by and large, that's professional development. Those were the functions that centrally develop products to help teachers teach. And that took the largest cut over the last not quite 10 years. District admin second, and then you'll see across to the right, the other state functions. When you look in the far right, it certainly stands out that special education instruction is the only state function that has continued to grow. In fact, grew again between this year and next year, in large part because of our pre-K continues to increase for the special ed children. If we get a chance to talk about that later, we can explain why. But we get a lot of questions from the public that says, let's focus on instruction, 13.5%. So why doesn't everybody take an across the board cut? And I'll just one quick example, because you can't have 13% of the schools without a principal in order to try to get an equal percentage of the total classroom teachers. By and large, for most of these state functions, where you see instruction, in some cases support services students, a lot of those reductions were actually due to lower numbers of students over time, whereas the other state functions, the admin components and support services, really, they weren't cut because of lower enrollment. They were cut in order to get a balanced budget. Next slide.
This is Dina Bishop again, and the next slide is from that budget book that we shared at the joint meeting. This just gives you a comparison of the ratios of the pupil to teacher. The number represents the ratio of students that you would assign a teacher. Once you hit 21, you would assign another teacher, but not until you got another 21, or actually half of that 10, do you assign a half teacher. So they're given in full and half equivalents according to how many kids are in that grade level. But then once they are assigned to a school, schools can determine the needs at their school, how they're going to place teachers. As you know, many classrooms have split classrooms with 5th and 6th grade in the same, and others do not. It just depends on the school and how they can manage it. Next slide. The increase on the prior page, you saw the increase was just in secondary at 30.25. It doesn't mean, obviously, a quarter of a kid goes into a class. It just means that when you assign all your teachers, you're just having more kids per teacher. So then it ends up having less teachers in the end. This slide demonstrates everything outside of classroom teachers that are assigned to a school. You'll look at librarians, nurses, office admin, BPO, building plant operator. The changes that we want you to focus on, and that's really what we talk about what looks differently in the program this year than last year in the organization of staff. Those are the reductions made. All of these are going to have a similar flow, so I'll just spell it out this first time, but when I get to the middle and high, I won't go through them. A reduction due to enrollment you'll see in each of the 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high. We redesigned the health program, adding that 15 minutes twice a week, 45-minute PE time for 30 minutes, and another 30 minutes in library. That only happens twice a month, so it's a total of 2 hours a month reassigned. And then realigning the staffing formula to reduce that, health teachers while increasing the FTE. Because we had to increase specialists and other teachers. So basically, there's a net decrease there with those changes. The PTR was unchanged. So while we still have some reductions in staff, the PTR is unchanged. It's just other indicators such as enrollment changed. We have that late start, early release that we're still working on a memorandum of agreement to see if we can put that off a year from now if possible. especially due to the circumstances. And then continue funding the instructional coaches, and this comes up a lot. These are grant funds that can only be used for professional development. So there's ideas about take that, put it here. There are strings attached to those federal funds as always. Next slide, middle school is a little bit more detailed, showing you each and every individual school in regard to the amount of students housed. It would determine the principals, counselors, librarians, and other people. Again, the changes and the inputs, what is going to change. We added the PTR again so that you can see it's increased by 0.25, a quarter of a student. However, that quarter of a student only gives some schools loss in teachers. Next slide. High school. High school has the same changes. They're decreased in cost, some of them, and unassigned teachers. What we did, the enrollment district-wide calls for an amount of teachers, and what we do is we have holdback teachers so that the next year, if there's a migration of students from one school to another, we don't have to pull someone from a school and put them in another one. We'll have a whole teacher that can cover that. This year, we cut half of the whole teachers we had from last year, and so we had to make some changes right at the early outset of the year, which was disruptive. We pulled a teacher, from one school, put him in the other 2 days before school started because that's where the kids showed up. It is disruptive, but it's what our business is now because we go down to the wire, and the holdback unassigned teachers at high school are being reduced as well. And you can take a look at all the changes. You can go to the next slide. Staffing allocations for alternative schools look like these. We have not really addressed alternative schools. Some of the questions that are coming up and emails about save, or save, avail. This year, avail already combined with Benny Benson, and we combined administrators and support. We actually reassigned the administrator from special schools to really work on avail because that's where the majority of the students were. Prior to this time, avail was under the principal who does McLaughlin. The outcomes for avail are more likened to SAVE and Benny Benson. So by merging the schools, able to make efficiencies in teaching staff, maybe find some reduction. Avail is not going away, SAVE is not going away, King Tech or AMCS. They are, however, being redesigned. Some of them co-located for their administrative positions, meaning not only administrators, how we've combined the jobs in the past, we did that actually this year, but also to look at the admin staff now and others, which allows you to save some funds. Avail will continue to have a classroom downtown in Anchorage area. It's not that that is going away. We will continue to have a classroom. However, the administrative offices that were in the garage are no longer going to be there. They're going to be at Benson. So technically Benson and Avail were already merged this year. Same as AMCS and King Tech, they have the same administrator. AMCS, their administration and their teachers are going to be moved to King Tech. Kids operate the same. They get on that UAA bus and go over to UAA. So it just looks different, but the programs, actually if kids didn't know, they would never know it was a change because they're on campus at the university. Next slide.
Okay, this is Jim Anderson again. The next 3 slides will be broad overviews of all the changes by breakout. This is probably a good time to point out that of all the changes that the administration recommended to the board, many of them the board did not approve. And multiple examples from Ignite through security to, by and large, almost every single thing that you recommend cutting on a budget year when you have insufficient funds will bring out a special interest group. So I just wanted to highlight that at this point, by the time it gets to the assembly, the board had already heard comments. We were going to defund the dome for $200,000. And quite honestly, the number of emails that talk about college scholarships lost, futures destroyed, you go there from security, you do Ignite, and health teachers. So by the time it gets to the assembly, and now there's some angry people that reach out, I just wanted to point out that we have now narrowed down those groups of frustrated people to a pretty small number, but we certainly did look at more than just what you see as the reductions. So school-based changes, you'll see that really almost half of all the teachers that were cut were because of enrollment. And as you work your way down, the metric-based teacher reductions due to program changes, although you cut 28 health teacher positions, you also added back librarians and some other positions to be able to fill planning time, which Dr. Bishop had talked about. But the total FTE of all variants, school-based changes for next year is 51. Next slide. The next slide should be no surprise. Special education is continuing to grow. I've already talked about that. If there's any questions about specifics, we'll talk about during question and answer session. Next slide. And then some district-wide changes, the district level changes as missions come up. There very well could be a reorganization in the near future, depending on how the next couple of months go. So those kind of change annually, but you'll see that really we kept it pretty flat. I'll hand off to Andy Ratliff to talk about the school board amendments that led the finalized budget we presented to you. Next slide.
Thank you, Mr. Andy. The school board did make a few changes as we were building a budget, particularly within our state legislative grants, what we will request or have requested to the state. This is on our local state federal grants fund, not within our general fund, but it's $3.9 million for elementary school mental health services, whether that's counselors or other mental health professionals. And $68 million to reduce class size in K-12, $58 million was by 15 PTR at grades K through 3 and 25 at grades 4 through 12. And then they used an additional $2.3 million of funds balance to retain Ignite program in its current form. And they also reduced district administration by about 1% and added into our budget PFD lottery funds, which is about $150,000 or so to retain 3 security positions that were originally planned to be reduced, and then added a 4th position for security. Next slide.
This is Dina Bishop. This slide just restates again that the budget met all of these requirements. Thanks. Next slide.
Okay, quickly had asked, this is Andy again. The assembly had asked a few questions prior to the meeting that we'll go through the next slides quickly so you can get on to the rest of the questions. So our next slide is question with how much would the taxes be increased for the year. This is in the AM that was submitted. So for the calendar year, it's about $5.1 or $5.2 million for operational things. And that's the general fund, transportation, and debt service funds that would be increasing. And that's about 0.11 on the mill rate, or $11 per 100,000. Once we add in the unfunded bond debt that the governor reduced in for the fiscal year 20 budget for the state, that's about $16.5 million after we take out what we can pay out of savings, which was about $4 million. The estimated mill rate increase goes up by 0.59, or about $59 per 100,000. Next slide. There was a request to go through some of the other funds and see what had changed. Predominantly, the local tax appropriation changed on our debt service fund. That's increased as we've had 5 years of when we sell bonds. It's no longer since voter approved bonds from 2015 forward have not had any state reimbursements. That $4.4 million increase is reflective of those bonds that have been passed and they're now being paid down. Next slide. Our student and I apologize for the size of these. We didn't have time to format them, or I didn't do a very good job formatting very quickly. But pupil transportation, we have no real changes in the level of service that we're providing. We're asking for about $800,000 in additional general fund contributions to be able to keep providing those services to students without having to reduce any of our routes. Next slide. Student nutrition fund, that is entirely funded by local and federal sources. No tax revenue goes into this. And there's really not a whole lot of changes in the plan to provide student nutrition to students for next year. Next slide. And then the other funds we have are student activities and self-supporting, so any funding raised goes into those funds, and they can only be spent after they're raised. The capital projects line we include for upper limit spending. It's intended to be there to preserve spending authority in case we do get legislative grants or other sort of non-bond funded projects. Then the local, state, federal grants, those are predominantly from title grants. And then we have some contingency because we always get grants that we don't know about after the budget's been awarded or approved. So if we get these grants, we have to have some place to take them from to have the upper limit authority. And as we mentioned earlier, we have the additional 68 million for lower class size and 3.9 million for mental health professionals. I believe that is all we have for our slideshow.
Great. So we have until 5 today, so we have some time to go into depth on several things. First in the queue, I have Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. First, I just want to thank the school district administration and the school board for all of your work, both answering our questions and on the budget, and especially on your response to COVID-19. I really briefly want to reiterate the frame for the discussion that I'm about to open up again on the health program and health teachers. And just in case my words are misinterpreted in any way, I just want to state very clearly that we all care. I know that our teachers care, I know the school board cares, and I know that the assembly cares. But again, the frame that I'm using for this is the fact that we are #1 in the nation for sexual assault and domestic violence, and these health programs are an important way to combat that and address that issue. I also want to really take exception to some of the emails and work that folks have sent to us, that somehow these are just angry people. I think I heard that said. That's not the case. I've heard a lot since our last meeting from classroom teachers, health teachers, former members of the administration, and others who are concerned. And just to put a fine point on this before I move on to my actual questions, when it came to Ignite, you're right, there was hundreds of parents that came out to testify against the cuts to Ignite. We didn't get that kind of outreach when it came to the cuts to the health teachers. And that's primarily because the ones that are most impacted by those cuts, their parents may not even know that this is happening. So I am raising this as an advocate for those children. So, questions. I'm going to just ramble all of the questions since I'm in the queue now, and then would appreciate responses. So first, what is the total dollar amount that we're looking at here? I've heard a lot of different responses here, from 2 million to 5 million. Second, what are the realistic impacts that are going to happen because the health programs are time for it is cut practically by half? I understand that the curriculum is not changing, but the time for the program is changing. How is that going to impact curriculum and how this is administered to our students? Tying in with that, how does this impact non-health curriculum? So what kind of impacts are we going to see to our core studies like social science and other sciences, or however this is packaged? And then lastly, when it comes to training, what are we doing on training here? Because there's very different levels of training for a health teacher, which might require, from what I'm hearing from health teachers that reached out to me, additional 2 years of study versus a PE teacher versus a classroom teacher versus a nurse. There's all different kinds of training. So how do we make sure that the right training is being done if we move forward with this approach as the budget dictates? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Would someone from the school district like to, or several people like to try to answer those questions?
Sure. This is Dina Bishop, and I should have written those down because there are probably about 5 or 6 of those questions. So in an order. So I'll start from the training, of course. The specialty, when we did move to health teachers at the time that the negotiated agreement changed, what was required, and they were generally classroom teachers that moved over into health, and then from then on, as those positions were changed, we were asked to get 6 additional hours in health. And so that, depending on the length of time that took someone to get that, that might be something different for individuals. But certainly training for curriculum is ongoing in the district. Melanie Sutton, we can outline some of those. The way that the health is delivered is actually in many packets and many booklets on different topics. And so those topics are really looked to be placed in the appropriate areas. When they talk about the heart and the aorta and the blood flow and heart rate, that could be in PE or in science. I think some of the concerns primarily that you might be mentioning are those that are very sensitive topics that from mental health to physical health, safe touching. Those are basically when we expect teachers to deliver curricula, they are provided professional development. So whether that's through coaching or experts, we have nurses help, but certainly elementary health is something that is in the general curriculum. When you become an elementary teacher in your core degree, you do get that generalist, and that's literally how most health is delivered in elementary schools around the nation. So I'm confident, and that's, I actually didn't didn't take offense to that, and I just want to ensure that I really am confident teachers that they can address health at the elementary level. On the high school levels and things like that get much more detail. In regard to the number, again, the total number that we shared was out to make up the 19.5 million was over 5 million. 6 million, 14 million was found outside of any kind of reduction to people. The last had to find at the last little over 5 to 6 million were found at the school-based level, and we had a hard number on that. But when you reduce, the health program itself is 28 teachers, and so because of the different levers you see in the budget book, that 28 teachers were reduced in health and redistributed, but others were hired. So it's all really a piece of the puzzle putting together to meet all of those requirements. So depending on how you decide to create your budget and your program really determines which amount comes from where. But if you look at 28.7, and if the wish was to restore that, what you're looking at is almost $3 million. We generally say about 100,000 per teacher. Some are less with benefits and insurance, and some are slightly more. So the mean is about 100 grand. So 2.8 million was 3 million there. So again, the redesign was with PE health. Many PE teachers do have that health certification. That's part of your, if you look up in a college, your general training is generally, if you want to become a PE teacher, your minor is health. So we're looking at those units that are easily delivered, and we used to do it this way. This is the way that ASD did it for many years. Looking to deliver those units in PE, delivering units. Librarians were asked to do it. We were not suggesting that classroom teachers do it first. We were understanding that there are some schools that they teach some of the units in classrooms, so we weren't going to ban it from that. The flexibility within the school day is going to change because there is work being done on that to be able to see how can we flex the other times. So much curriculum takes time. How can we flex it and integrate it to teach thematically? So reading, we look in grades 3, 4, and 5 to be decreased. So there'll be additional time there, as well as science and social studies, really looking at outcomes and how these things can be thematically taught, so it doesn't feel like a teacher has one thing stacked on top of another. So that's some of the information. I believe that people are upset and they do care. I agree with that. And we are just in a no-win situation with the reduction of the budget. The other information in cost, if it could help to answer the question, we sent the numbers that are real numbers in regard to PTR. If health teachers were placed back in as set, we have to funnel it down. That's why we shared with you a 0.5 FTE increase and a 1.0. We don't believe it'll be as low as 0.5 or as high as 1.0. It'll be somewhere in between. But you could see school to school how that PTR was adjusted. It doesn't work out to be a half a kid a classroom. You see that if one FTE was added to every grade level in elementary, there are a little over, I think, 41 schools that would be affected by losing 1 to 1.5 staff members. If it was just a 0.5 addition, then it would be about 20. So it's somewhere in between. And again, it's a staffing ratio of assignment of metrics so that we have equitability, and then we also add to that on top depending on the needs of the school. So hard and fast answers about, I want to know money, this, that, they're all intertwined together. As you can see, the amount of kids, if you change your PTR, then your staffing changes, then the price tag changes, if you will, on how all that works out. We're happy to work up some models that you have. One that was requested was, what does it look like if you add a 0.5 in every class? That was what the request was from the assembly, and we worked out that model for you to all schools, and then also did the 1.0, because again, it would fall somewhere in between those two to give you a mind's eye. And basically that is general ed classroom teachers that would be removed from those schools. Just to give an understanding, and that came out of the data. If you don't have questions,
Mr. Rivera, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, very briefly, Mr. Chair. So thank you, Dr. Bishop, for those answers. So I just want to make sure I heard correctly, because if so, that's very stunning. That cuts, changes to the health program and the way that it's being administered is going to impact in elementary schools reading, science, and social studies.
No, the impact is that we are adjusting all schedules daily so that it would just depend if someone wanted to, because they're a creative teacher, teach the hard systems in their science class, they would absolutely be allowed to do that, and then the librarian or PE teacher wouldn't have to. Essentially, I guess you could say any reduction in a school is going to affect what teachers do daily in schools. So in the 30,000 foot view, yes, it's actually true, because we're changing the programs, we're reducing people to do the work. So there's always going to be an impact. It just isn't necessarily yes reading, yes science, yes this. It really is based off of the expertise of the program design and how schools want to deploy their resources. In some schools, the way they operate, just so you know, is one teacher, say in 5th grade, does all the health and science, and none of the other teachers do that, and they say, well, I'll take your math if you do this. There's many different ways that schools organize to deliver services. The schools that especially have split grade levels share those responsibilities. So you might have, if in 5th grade and 6th grade, for instance, we have 2 5th grade teachers, 2 6th grade teachers, and 1 5/6 teacher, there might share the responsibility of the subjects, because that poor 5th, 6th grade teacher would be responsible for both those grade levels, all the different constructs. So sometimes the 5th grade teachers might organize and say, you know what, don't worry about health, or you don't worry about science. I'll do all the science for 5th grade if you can cover my social studies. And then you're able to be more flexible that way.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to move on. We have several other people in the queue, starting with Ms. Zalatel.
Okay, sorry, I had to find my mute button. I actually have a few questions, so just a heads up in case you want to write them down. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Sorry.
Okay. So how does the health teacher issue relate to contractual requirements for teacher preparation time? Do I understand it correctly that basically without having health as a separate special, so therefore it covers time at elementary, the district cannot meet its planning time for teachers, therefore it requires the shortened instructional time during the week? Another one of my questions, since I'm here, is I want to drill down on the district and the board's decision that PTR is the #1 priority, and how that against other options has been communicated to the public. I think I need to know more about how it's been posed to the public, a question of PTR or less instructional time, because I've never heard that well communicated as a parent or in the community. And I need to understand that better. And then also, has anyone communicated to the public about what if we just kept the status quo, how it worked this year, and what it would mean in terms of a PTR change, and what feedback and how has that been communicated, or do we need to go back and maybe do that? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Ms. Otto.
Thank you. Those are great questions. The first one is in regard to the planning and the instructional time. I mean, essentially the seminal change that was made in the district was due to planning time. When elementary teachers, there had increased minutes. And the sheet explains that a little bit in regard to for an hour a week, someone else comes in and the classroom teacher doesn't have the children, so the classroom teacher can plan. And someone comes in over a month for 2 weeks, it's the health teacher to teach something, and then the other 2 weeks it's the art teacher to teach something. And we really, what we did was remove that instructional, so the teacher's time is the same, the kids' time. The change then there was the instructional time, I believe, for the late start, and that's the other piece to address. And the way that came about was during our calendar surveys, a question was placed out there. We had a new calendar last year and this year, and moving into next year, it's the same one. And what was recommended from this PLAT group, it's a group made up of teachers, unions, so teacher representations, also union leadership, district. It's about 30 people, and they create the calendar for ASD so that we have community members are on there, just different stakeholders. And there was a survey put out, I believe it was last year, it might have been the spring before that, asked about calendars, what you like. Would you be interested in a late start, early release? Many of our charter schools do this already, and our high schools. And of the people who responded to the survey, it was pretty favorable. About half said, yes, I would be interested in that. And so the Plaque Committee brought it back to the board at that time and had some calendars with the late start, and the board said, you know what, let's work a year on this. Let's take a look and see where this is. But since it was a favor that people weren't objectionable to it, that sounded good. That also came at the same time that the school start time did not go through, so the changes in school start time. So I believe it was kind of an effort to allow for the late start time. Some high schools went ahead and moved in that direction anyway. But through surveys is how we received that information from the community, parents, they went out. The other thing in regard to how did we know class size, that came out loud and clear in testimony, public testimony at the board level, as well as the survey that we shared online. And those guardrails that I provided you were the outcomes of the survey. The first ask from parents and actually teachers internally and externally, and it could be because most teachers are classroom teachers perhaps, internally and externally came out to please protect class size. We cannot keep putting kids and losing teachers and putting kids in our class size. The second one that was most desired was for programs. Don't eliminate our arts, don't eliminate. So we want to be able to continue to do and offer kids the experiences we can. We don't want to cut one whole thing out, was something else. And then the last one, of course, is safety is still of high priority. And so what we did this year, because we had that from the community, is we did an internal, how then would you suggest that we change what we do? And that was that 200 different teams, school teams from different schools, different grade levels, the music teachers got together, different people just got together to say, hey, we work in the buildings, administration, you're far away, how is it that we can organize and be efficient with our resources and have these guardrails from the survey, the budget survey and budget testimony that went out. And at that time, some different designs came up. Again, some said, that's why we looked into all of those, because just as many, came in as, reorganize, free band and orchestra, do this or do that. Some of the changes that were recommended actually were cost drivers that would increase the cost. Others actually were a different way. One of the things that the district also wanted to do was to preserve our employees, and understanding that health teachers have an elementary certification. We knew that if we redesigned it, those health teachers could then continue to be employed with the district as general education teachers, because they're fine teachers, they're great teachers. And the other way around, though, if we were to increase the PTR, we would essentially simply just lose teaching positions to the district. So that came in at the end in doing our due diligence for our community and the health of people. And so I would say that it wasn't all student-based, it was employee-based as well at the end of the day and at the end of the decision making. I think that those two were primarily the questions and the input in regard to how the health and the contractual obligations coalesce with each other.
So I've got a follow-up, and if that's okay with the chair.
Yep.
Okay, so actually two follow-ups. First, I think, the work that the district's done with regard to its surveys, that data is fantastic, but I don't think it gets to communicating to parents the correlation between the health program and it being cut and the shorter instructional days, that it's a one-for-one right now. And I think that is an imperative communication we need to be making to the parents and to the community. And with regard to that shorter instructional time, what information do we have about the impacts on kids? This is really feeling like a double whammy to those kids who probably need this the most. Those who need health education, but training qualified specialized staff, as well as those kids who probably need additional instructional time. What do we expect kids families to do during this time with late starts, early releases. We know that that is one of the drivers of why some kids and some families don't apply to charter schools or other types of school. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that. What do we want them to do?
Yeah, so there's actually lots of different opportunities. It is not, there is bus service, so if it's a later start during one time, it would be some adjustment. And if we did it late start, everybody would have to be on the same, but if we did it early release, we do have an option for elementary students to actually get that additional time spent with staff, whether it's auxiliary staff, tutors, advisors, or even 21st century outside partners in our partnerships to be able to extend our before or after school services and or tutoring services. So around the country, it is a it's a model that is used for basically exemplary professional development, so teachers can work together on student needs. And when the teachers get together, other supplements can be added. Presently at East High, they're a late start, but the kids who need additional supports come in early, and that's on a bus. They'll get there and then they can get assistance. We haven't fully really spelled out the programs, but right now in schools that do early releases, they actually have after school activities, extra tutoring, more support. So we would look to partner for those that cannot be home or need the additional supports. The outcomes in districts that have something like this are good outcomes for student outcomes. So, and it is because they utilize that time as well, where kids aren't trying to catch up all the time. It's an additional reteaching and extra support. So it hasn't been totally flushed out because the time wasn't given to it. It was based off of that original plan calendar survey and then working through. Again, we did request a waiver that it comes the year after next, because we can offer the appropriate time off to elementary teachers if we have a shortened week, 1 week, and then have a longer. So over 2 weeks, because of the organization with ART, we can offer the appropriate prep time over a 2-week period, if that happened every other week, but we can't do weekly, and the contract actually says by week there's so many minutes needed. So we're working on that as well. So we have lots of different avenues to explore.
Okay.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Dunbar?
Who is that?
This is John Marsack. We don't have any way to cue in, but I just wanted to add to the conversation.
Okay.
But I'm hearing as a school board member, and I hear just the other day I heard from another teacher that, positions are being eliminated. We've got combo classrooms. We've had to cut back on teacher assistants in the classroom. We're seeing escalated behaviors. I cannot take one more person in my class. And what I see is, yes, health is important, but what our kids really need is we need mental health professionals in our school. And that's what I would like to strive for, is getting our kids the help they need to combat some of these behaviors and the trauma that they're facing. Health is going to teach a lot of things, but it's not going to help with the underlying cause of what's happening. It's going to educate, but it's not going to help those children that need the help. And we just cannot keep adding students to our teacher classrooms and expect them to be able to manage and teach at the same time.
Thank you. Any other discussion on this point? Okay, we have Ms. Kennedy in the queue. Yeah.
This is Stephen Mitchell, I'm sorry. I want to jump in also and just reiterate what our board chair, board president Marcette just said. We, the bottom line, just like you in the municipality, is that the district really, we have a lot of dedicated professionals who really care deeply about our students. As you know, that's why they all went into this field. The bottom line is that over years of having to focus, second guess, rejuggle all the time, adjust to different budgets, make assumptions, and make many cuts. Our teachers it is a very, very difficult situation to be in. And, I have tried to communicate to our legislators over and over again that if we could get some predictability, we would be able to take that energy and those resources and focus on looking forward and, addressing some really serious issues. Not that we don't do this, but there's so many resources that go into this. And as you heard Dr. Bishop going through the process, are there other cuts that some of us might have made instead of the cuts they made? Possibly if we were in there making the sausage, but they really truly took a look at anything we cut is going to hurt. That's the bottom line. And I do believe that they took a look at what do they think is going to have the least amount of impact on our students. And I have said over and over again, we need support from prenatal through age 4. If the kids come to us in better shape, then the district doesn't have to be all things to all people. And we absolutely, I echo what Board President Marcette just said about, the health and social services needs to be staffed appropriately. We need to have resources for our families, and all of those things, plus just being able to plan out more than 6 months or a year ahead of time, would help them tremendously. And I know that you are under the same kinds of constraints, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. So at this time, we have 3 people in the queue, starting with Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm assuming that you hear me just fine. Well, one of the things that I think I want to say is that, having been a former school board member, I recognize that it is the district's responsibility to allocate the funds and the resources that they have and use them appropriately. And I think it's the school board's responsibility for oversight and supervision of that process. And I think for me now, as an assembly member, my role is not so much to understand or to specify how each dollar should be spent, but to basically appropriate those dollars. So what I look at this, what I look at this now is to basically say that I figure out we can afford this budget. And one of my questions that I had sent in to the district before was in regard to the bonds, and so I absolutely appreciate the breakdown of what the bond indebtedness is and how much taxpayers are going to pay not only toward the general fund taxes but toward bond indebtedness taxes. So my question in that though is I'm also familiar with the fact that there are typically leftover funds left in some of those bonds that are past bonds. A lot of times it's just small amounts here or there. And so my question is, when was the last time the bond council actually reviewed all of those leftover bond funds? And do you have an update, a recent update about how much might actually be left over? And could bond council be pressured to allow you to use them? I know one year we had about $11 million left over in unused bond funds, and that went toward an awful lot of maintenance. So anyway, just thought I'd ask that to see if anybody can have that detail, that level of detail. Thank you.
This is Jim Anderson. I think I can talk that. So over the past, 14, 15 months since the earthquake, we've used quite a few of the older bonds, those FY 12 through 15, that still had some state debt reimbursement. And some of those bonds had money left over, and we converted that towards earthquake repairs. But there's not a lot, and there's not a lot because we haven't closed out some of the projects. They're almost done, or they haven't got the final sign off yet, or something like that. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but Ms. Kennedy, I can get that to you. The only bond that had absolute freedom for earthquake, of course, was the bond that passed last April. But we're looking very closely at all of the projects. And as soon as those FY12 through 15 get closed out, we will have some funding left, but I don't think it's going to be the amount you just mentioned. It's in the smaller millions.
Do you have any follow-up, Mrs. Kennedy?
And if I might, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment that it's really not necessary. I just wanted to know if you had the opportunity to do that, if bond council was being cooperative in helping you understand how much money was in there, and then if you had any hope for there being anything that could potentially be used. But I will say that that's probably my biggest concern right now, knowing that the 16 million absence of state reimbursement is really kind of problematic, and it's going to be a big chunk of that taxpayer debt this following year, in the next 2020-21 year budget. So I am very concerned about that huge amount. It does look very disturbing, when people see that part of the budget is going to have a 12% increase. So anyway, I don't know what the answer is. I was hoping that there would be some money coming out of the sale of an LP that might have been able, we could have used to try to offset that amount. But considering the kind of economic fallout we're probably going to be seeing, just because of the fact that we have tens of thousands of people who aren't working right now and have no benefits and no income and salary. So, obviously it remains to be seen what we're going to actually be faced with in terms of even being able to collect our taxes. So, I guess I'd just say keep that in mind as the Assembly has to look at what we do, not only with your budget, but with our own. So, anyway, just not a good place for any of us to be. But thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. I could add that we're also working with DEED to make sure that anything closed out has the authority for redirect. And we also are working with Representative Johnston and Senator Von Emhoff to get old legislative grants reappropriated to the tune of a little bit over $1 million into the capital budget on as it goes to the floor next week. So we have talked to legislators and DEED, and we're looking at every available way to clean up old corners where there might be unsold authority or appropriated authority and redirect that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kennedy. Ms. LaFrance, you're in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are 3 items I want to bring up, and actually I wanted to return back to the need for both teacher planning time and PLC, and the understanding being that if you eliminate a special, you're eliminating planning time for some teachers, and that this professional learning is very important and can better serve students. So to keep the benefit, the planning time and the PLC needs to be kept, and not replace the planning time with the PLC. And it seems like in the discussion we're conflating this a bit. And my second point, or actually it's a question as to funding. And first of all, I very much appreciate all the work that board members in the district have done, and I know that you have looked at this from all angles. And I'm not as informed about on the accounting side. And my question is, what separate reserve accounts do you have? Like, for example, I understand there's one for school bonds and equipment replacement. I understand earlier that $8.3 million has been taken from fund balance, about 1.5%. And I'm wondering, what do you have available from other accounts? And is there any way to take more from those? My third question has to do with recess. This was raised by someone who brought this up to me. And has the district or board members, have you considered adding more recess in order to give teachers more planning time, given that additional resources correlated with higher outcomes and possibly could be staffed with TAs, and it would avoid an early release scenario, or could, at least at the elementary level. So those three areas, the conflation of planning time with PLC, fund availability, and then consideration of additional recess. Thanks.
Thank you. This is Tina Bishop, and I will handle 1 and 3, and then Jim Anderson can handle 2 with the district numbers, and then board members can add to that last question as well, the policy. I'll just share the kind of conceptual ideas. So the return to the planning, yes, PLCs and planning will both be kept. At the middle and high school levels, the time would just be PLCs because they have their planning time built into their schedule already. At the elementary level, if it's a late start, an hour a week, 2 of those hours and 2 of those weeks would be used for planning, opposite of the art time that they have, and 2 would be PLC time to meet with other teachers. So to number 1, yes, your concern is actually taken care of. The one is not for the other. They're not being traded out. It's the power of the and then certainly in recess, good news, we did that recess study, and recess actually is increasing for other reasons, but for this, the additional time, that would be something that we could do, but we would have an additional cost with the TAs to cover that, or increasing money. So we were organizing to reduce our overall expenditures, but the TAs that are in the schools now are actually assigned to specific children in regard to IEPs. And so to have an extra hour recess is great. I mean, it is. It wouldn't be bad. It would just be an addition of staffing in each school to have the sufficient number of supervision for safety and security during that time. So that isn't out of the question for a possibility. It just would, at this time, include additional staffing because the majority of TAs are strictly assigned to classrooms outside of the kindergarten TA of a half a TA per half time per teacher are all special ed. And Jim Anderson Andy Ratliff can take the second, and then we'll turn it over to the school board. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Andy. So in regards to the funding or our fund balances that we do have that we could carry forward and potentially use, we do have restrictions on a lot of these. When we ended 2019, we had about $24 million in unassigned fund balance. That was at the lower end of what was in board policy is our minimum fund balance, and which is the state allows 10% of operating expenditures to be carried over as what they call undesignated fund balance, which for us includes money we plan to spend next year, our bond rating, which is about $25 million, and then our unassigned fund balances. So we can use board policy sets a minimum of 8% of state expenditures as that, so between the 8 and 10% is about $12 million. And of that $12 million gap, or we're planning on using about $8.3 million for next year. That's what our usage of fund balance is. Other things we have in fund balance reserves, we have self-insurance reserves to pay off any workers' comp or liability claims. And then we have ongoing projects for charter schools IT maintenance, as well as things like inventory and prepaid that you can't spend because of just stock items. And that's general fund money. We do have some money in transportation. We ended with about $840,000 last year. In our budget, we have put, I believe it was another $500,000 to use as fund balance for transportation. So we are trying to spend that rather than ask for taxes. Food service fund balance can only be used for food service items because the money comes from federal sources. And then we have money about $5.6 million in student activities money. That's student raised. I suppose you could take it from them, but you have a lot of unhappy students. And you couldn't move it over to the general fund because then it would exceed that state cap as unassigned fund balance. With respect to the internal service funds for equipment replacement, health insurance, and compensated absences, the equipment replacement fund, we have about 10 million or so unrestricted assets or net assets to pay for the replacement of equipment over the years. It's about we usually run 35 or 36% of our replacement value in that fund. So at any given time, we could replace about 36 million or 36% of our capital needs, which is our white fleet vehicles, school buses, and servers, as well as like print shop equipment. Compensated absence fund, that money's all due to the employees for accrued leave. And the health insurance fund is what folks have paid into there, and most of it's due to be paid out in claims for reserve for IBNR or incurred but not reported claims. Does that kind of get at your question?
Yes, thank you.
And this is Charlotte that I would just add that as a board policy, we have to vote if our reserve goes below 8%, and I believe right now we're at 8.5%. If you remember, we had a school burn down, Chris, we probably remember that, and we were able to take the funds out of our reserve to start the building of that school right away. And given the uncertainty of our times right now, we are really trying to conserve as much of that reserve as we possibly can for emergency.
Thank you.
And one other thing I would add on the TAs for recess is that we don't have enough TAs in our classroom. I think our teachers would prefer to have those TAs in the classroom than out at recess or in the lunchroom or something like that. But thank you.
Thank you. We have Mr. Slifka, and then we have Mr. Dyson in the queue.
So Alex Slifka, through the chair, CFO. The municipality has had many conversations with ASD finance team, and we agree with the steps they've taken this year. They have taken their fund balance down to the very low end of what the rating agencies look for, and in the same way that the municipality has fund balance requirements, so does the school district. We both borrow money. If they were to take it down below 8%, then we start to get into real difficult territory with the rating agencies. And I think I've mentioned to many people, if they start dropping our AAA rating, our costs start to go through the roof real quick, and then stay there 10 million a year plus, because remember that we have close to $2 billion in debt outstanding, and we go to the market for 100+ million every year. And if we had to pay more, the cost would get very expensive very quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Slifka. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The person that brought up the district wanting financial stability, everybody wants that. We're in a state where basically the income is from oil taxes is about 1/4 of what it was 7 years ago. That's out of our control. Almost none of the experts can predict it, and things like what are happening here, those are not predictable. It's the real world we operate in. Dina, appreciate your efforts. I think you can answer my questions almost with one word. What is the percentage of special ed kids that in the district, kids that have IEPs?
We have about 12% total, 2%, a little bit under 2%, probably intensive.
All right, yeah, and I know that the budget for special ed is right around 17%. Did this budget leave your excellent middle college program intact?
Yes, Assemblyman Dyson, because that program pays for itself totally, and actually.
I heard you say yes. I heard you say yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
I understand from years of watching that lots of government regulations and reporting requirements on you, some from the Fed, some from the state, probably some from us, impose a whole lot of reporting requirements and drive up the number of administrative staff you've got to have to support all those things that probably are net draw. Have you had any idea what percentage of your budget is other people were imposing stuff like that on you?
I would have to get back with you on that. It seems like that's all that I do, so I know my salary's there.
Yeah, and I would guess that it's 5, 6, 7%, but do get back to me. That's only an interest of mine, but I think a real world thing you have to deal with. Appreciate you guys, and I appreciate the situation you're in and the job you're trying to do. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson.
Oh, one more thing.
Oh.
I always keep harping about not using acronyms. I went through this document, found 5 or so that were defined, 5 that I could guess at, and 16 more that I had no clue of. And I do not understand how professionals who want to communicate would want to use code that's so esoteric. And I'm used to being ignored, so forgive my nagging, but it's really an important point. If it's hard for me, you can imagine how it is for the general population. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I keep hearing this concern about behavior and behavioral health. I'm just going to toss it out here as a special education advocate. Is maybe we need to be considering, or are we doing adequate testing of students for special education eligibility so that we can get them the supports in the classroom? I understand the need for broad-based behavioral health supports, but if it's getting to the point, and you're hearing that it's getting to the point where it's disrupting classrooms, I think we need to take a serious look at that. So I wanted to share that concern based on what I heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zolotel. Anyone from the school district want to comment on that?
No, I think it was a suggestion and something to look into. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anyone else in the queue. Would anyone like to make any, ask any questions or make any closing remarks?
This is John Marstack. I just want to say thank you for taking the interest in our budget and recognizing what we do and how hard it is. I know that you guys get calls from your constituents and concerns, and you have to respond to those also. We understand that, and this isn't pitting us against you or anything like that. This is about us working together, and I just really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to answer your questions and hopefully being able to work together and move forward.
Thank you.
I concur.
I'm sorry, who was?
This is Dina Mitchell. I was actually going to unmute myself and say the same thing. I really appreciate your partnership in this and your support of the district.
Thank you. And who was the other person that spoke just now?
Sorry, Chair Delbar, this was Dina Bishop, and I concurred as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, any other closing comments by my colleagues?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
This is Crystal Kennedy.
Yes.
Thank you. Just actually a kind of a general question, not specifically about the budget, but I was just curious, and maybe Mr. Slip maybe can take this one, but what actually happens if the municipality gets to the point where it cannot collect the revenues that it is hoping to collect and has approved all these budgets on, whether that be the school district budget or the municipality's budget? Is it possible that we could be in that situation?
So, through the chair, Alex Lifka, CFO, a couple of things. I think I mentioned before, we do a tax anticipation note transaction. We actually we did that last week. We received that $100 million today. That is designed to have enough cash to get us at least through June or July. Without tapping into the roughly $200 million that is in the long-term funds in our cash pool. The other thing, which I think I've shared with many people, is that of the real estate taxes that we do collect, more than 50% of them are in escrow accounts, which by this time of the year are actually almost fully funded. So it's the likelihood that we would reach a scenario where we would not be able to collect our taxes is unlikely. I think the ultimate answer to that, of course, is, as you know, both states and municipalities are required to pass budgets. We cannot spend money that we don't have. The federal government can do that, and I think you can see the news that they're getting ready to spend close to $1 trillion to try and help resolve some of the short-term impacts of this scenario. So that's a long way of saying if we were not able to collect any taxes at all, I mean, we would have, I think, enough money to get us at least to the end of the year, but that would be a situation we would not want to anticipate, and we would clearly know about that, obviously, by the time we approve first quarter budget revisions.
Thank you, Mr. Slifka. Okay, seeing no further questions or comments, we're going to close this work session. Thank you all for coming.